Okay, here's the second part of the video lecture, Introduction to Psychology on Sensation and Perception. We just did the activity with the candy and with the music. And we're going to talk specifically about perceptions some more here. I know your book gives you other ideas and concepts related to both sensation and perception. I'm going to give you some ideas and some concepts that may not be in your book, so you want to have good notes with this stuff. There aren't definitions written down on these slides for some of these terms, so you're going to want to listen and make sure that you get down the definitions for some of these. Now, first, attention. Attention has a big impact on perception. If you don't pay attention to something, your perception of it is going to be very different from someone's perception who is paying attention. Like in a class. If you sleep through an entire class, your perception of what the teacher talked about is going to be very different from the person who paid attention and took notes. Okay, so what is attention? It's the ability to notice certain things but to ignore others. When we pay attention to something, we don't always catch everything. Your brain can't process every piece of stimulation or all stimuli that comes across you. You have to sort of pick and choose what you're paying attention to. And there are three types of attention that impact your perception of an entire situation. First, we'll start with selective attention. This one right here. By definition, selective attention is paying attention to one thing while ignoring the rest. Okay, by definition, selective attention is paying attention to one thing while ignoring everything else that's going on. I like to refer to selective attention as tunnel vision. If you have tunnel vision, you're focused on one thing and you're ignoring everything else. And certainly that type of attention will impact your perception of a situation. Let's say, hypothetically, you're walking through the hallways of your school and one of your friends says to you or asks you this question, "Hey, are you ready for the exam next period?" And you're like, "What exam?" So now you realize you have 5 minutes or 10 minutes to cram for this test that you have to take in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So what do? You sit in the hallway or you find somewhere and you cram for this exam. There could be explosions going off. There could be a fight in the hallway. There could be all kinds of drama, but you're not paying attention to that because you're focused on the task at hand. Generally, if there's a trauma or a crisis, like if someone is injured, for example, this tends to be when we engage in our selective attention. And when you pay attention to one thing, you miss things that are happening around you. The next type of attention is called divisible attention. I like to refer to this as multitasking. Divisible attention simply refers to our ability to pay attention to more than one thing at the same time. Again, our ability to pay attention to more than one thing at the same time. I'm not very good at multitasking. Research suggests that women are a little bit better than men at divisible attention or multitasking. I pulled up to the stoplight. I don't know if you're familiar with the police station in South Charleston there where Jefferson Road is. But I pulled up to the stoplight and I looked over and I noticed there was a woman in the car literally pulling up beside me. She had a coffee cup in her hand. She was doing her makeup with the other hand. She was driving with her knees, which I don't know how you would even do that, but she was doing like all this stuff at the same time. And you could tell she had a cell phone in her ear, so she was talking to someone while she was doing all this stuff. I don't suggest you do that while you're driving, any of that while you're driving, but it kind of makes the point. She was obviously doing 5 or 6 things at the same time. Some people are good at this, some people are not. Then you have shifting or shiftable attention. This very simply means that we move our attention from one thing to the next. We're shifting back and forth. Okay, again, with shiftable attention, we're moving our attention or shifting our attention from one thing to the next. It's not selective. You're not focused on one thing. And it's not divisible attention because you're not focusing on more than one thing at the same time. You're moving back and forth. An example of shifting attention or shiftable attention would be, let's say I'm cooking dinner. I'm paying attention to that, making sure nothing burns, right? Then I hear somebody knock at the door. So I leave that and I go run to the door and see who's there. Then I run back to the kitchen because food is burning. So now I'm paying attention to that. Then my cell phone goes off, so I got to pay attention to that. Then I hear a loud noise in another room of the house. So I run and see what that's about. So I'm moving my attention back and forth. So, and we all engage in these different types of attention, and they all impact our perception of an entire situation. Now, other factors that impact perception. We talked about attention, your mood. I'm willing to guess that a lot of you have playlists on your iPod or on your phones, on your iPhones, by mood. How many of you have like an angry playlist or a workout playlist or a sad playlist or a happy playlist? Your mood can impact your perception of a song. Another example of mood would be with music. You know, if you hear a song for the first time on the radio or the first time on your phone, you may think, I don't really like that song so much. But the more you hear it, the more you're like, yeah, it's okay, I kind of like it, to the point where you actually may really like the song at some time in the future. So your mood can impact your perception of a situation. Culture will definitely impact your perception of a situation. And we'll talk more about this as we go too. As far as music, the way that you dress, and those of you who had me for sociology, we talked a lot about culture. In different parts of the world, men greet each other, grown men, heterosexual men, greet each other with kisses on the lips or on the cheek. Within our American culture, we would look at that as being strange. We would have questions about that. The foods that we eat. There are people who don't understand why we would deep fry a potato chip or deep fry a potato and have a potato chip. I think potato chips are great. But at the same time, I don't understand why someone would want to deep fry an insect or eat pig intestines. But again, if you're born in a part of the world where it's very common to eat these kinds of things, you wouldn't think much about it. So your perception of music, of food, of anything hinges largely upon the culture that you're born into and raised in. And then context. Context also impacts perception. I can give you a great example of context. Sorry about that. If you're having a discussion with your best friend and you're kind of joking and you're playing around a little bit, and your best friend says something like, just screw off, or you're just an a-hole, or whatever, or maybe flips you off. Within that context, are you going to get angry? Probably not, because the context is, well, this is my friend and we're joking around. Now let's say you get into your car, you're leaving school, and you're driving off the parking lot, and a stranger cuts you off and flips you off. The same gesture that your best friend gave you a few minutes ago. Are you going to laugh that off? Probably not. You're probably going to be upset because the context is different. You don't know this person, and this person has cut you off in traffic. So context is also going to impact perception. Now, something that we have to talk about, it's not super exciting, but we're going to talk about them because it's required. Your book talks about thresholds, and I'm going to give you two of the main types of thresholds, and I'll give you some examples. To perceive something, we have to be able to sense it. We have to know that something is there or that something is changing. If we can't sense it, then we can't really perceive it. So sensation is important. So this leads us to a discussion of what are called thresholds. You want to have this in your notes. A threshold, by definition, is the smallest or the minimal amount of energy that's needed to tell something is happening or that something is changing. Okay? And there are two types of thresholds that we're going to cover. First of all, detection threshold. A detection threshold refers to the smallest amount of energy required for something to be noticed or reported at least 50% of the time. When you think of detection, we're thinking of being able to tell if something is there or not. Now, let me give you, we'll come back to that. The best example of a detection threshold I can give you, honestly, is your iPod or your phone. Okay, I'm going to show you mine right here. Now, if you want to figure out what your detection threshold is for sound, take your volume all the way down to 0. You can put your ear spuds in, whatever, and then slowly walk the volume up to volume 1, 2, 3, 4. Whenever you get to the point where you can just hear a sound, you have hit your detection threshold for hearing. For me, I would have to get it up probably to about 7 or 8 before I could really tell that there was a sound there. For you guys are younger, and your hearing may be better than mine. You may be able to get it up to 3 or 4 and then be able to hear that there's a sound. So detection thresholds across all senses are going to vary from person to person based on age, based on impairment, based on a lot of other things that we'll talk about later. So that's an example of a detection threshold. Now, a discrimination threshold, on the other hand, we're still talking about the smallest amount of energy, but we're talking about the smallest amount of change required to tell a difference between two things. To discriminate means to be able to tell the difference between. So again, the best example I can think of for simplicity, again, is the iPod example again here. If you want to figure out your discrimination threshold, take your volume level to 50, right in the middle, or 5, whatever the mid-level is for your volume, and then slowly walk it up. When you get to the point where you can just notice that it's louder, you've hit your discrimination threshold. For me, if I put the volume level on 50 and I walk it up 51, well, I'm not going to be able to tell a difference from 50 to 51. I get to 52, nah, 53, nah, 54, nah, 55, 56. Okay, I get to 57. Now I can tell that it's louder. So those 7 units of volume would represent my discrimination threshold for hearing in that specific situation. For you, again, being younger and hearing better than I, you may be able to take it from 50 to 53 or 54 and tell at that point that it's louder. So that gives you a couple of examples of thresholds, and I'll give you a few more here. Believe it or not, under normal conditions, with normal vision, you can see a candle on a dark night at a distance of 30 miles. 31 miles or more beyond that, you're not going to be able to see it. So that represents the detection threshold for vision. A ticking watch at a distance of 20 feet. If you get beyond 20 feet, probably not going to be able to hear that. For touch, the wing of a fly dropped on your cheek from 1 centimeter. For smell, in a 6-room house with no other smells present, 1 drop of perfume through the entire house would represent the detection threshold for smell. For taste, 1 teaspoon of sugar and 2 gallons of water. Anything less than a teaspoon of sugar, you're probably not going to be able to detect that there is sugar in the water. And this is important to have in your notes. Detection thresholds will vary from person to person. Like I said, for me, for hearing, it may take 7 or 8 volume levels to notice that there's a difference. For you, it may take 2 or 3. And they're also going to vary over time with the same person. When you're younger, your sensory capabilities are stronger. As you age, your sensory capabilities decline. So, your detection thresholds are going to be greater as you age. And also, women have superior sensory abilities over men, regardless of age, race, or ethnicity. So, they vary from person to person, and they will vary over time within the same person. Now, some examples of discrimination thresholds. We're talking about telling the difference between. We'll go through a couple of these, and then we'll end this video lecture. For a light bulb, using a 60-watt bulb, 1 watt difference is what's minimally needed to tell a difference. If you're sitting in a restaurant, sometimes maybe you've noticed the restaurant will dim the lights, and you'll be like, oh, wait a minute, did the lights just go down? You've noticed that you have hit your discrimination threshold with that. If you have a dimmer in your house, if you slowly turn the knob to intensify the light or to make it dim, you probably can't really tell that the light intensity is changing until you get to a certain point. When you get to that point, then you know you've hit your discrimination threshold for vision, for example. For pitch, it's 1/333 of a change. The discrimination threshold for weight is 1/50th of a change. So if you're lifting weights and you add just an ounce of weight to a 100-pound weight bar, you're not going to be able to tell that you're lifting something that's heavier. You need at least 1/50th. So it would take 2 pounds added to that weight bar for you to really minimally be able to tell that you're lifting something that's heavier. For volume, it's 1/10 of a change, generally speaking. And for taste, it's 1/5 of a change. So these represent examples of discrimination thresholds. And we're going to call that the end of this part. Thank you.